When I got started with computers, you had to type into the computer commands to get it to do what you wanted to do. My first DOS computer had no mouse, and the screen only had one color, white and green, I guess. Now we have mice, we have graphics, and you no longer need to learn programming in order to use a computer. You can even talk to your computer to tell it to do what you want it to do, like in Star Trek. So each year, technology gets easier to use, but easier does not mean that you don't need help. For many authors, the biggest thing holding them back is the technology. Authors who lack technical sophistication often get pulled into overpriced schemes like hybrid publishing and often struggle to find the success that they're looking for. By the time you're done with this episode, you will know how to have far fewer tech headaches. So how do you get good with technology? Find out in this episode of Novel Marketing, the longest running book marketing podcast in the world. I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr., CEO of Author Media, and this is the show for writers who want to build their platform, sell more books, and make a living writing books worth talking about. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast by clicking follow in your podcast app or clicking subscribe in YouTube. Before we get to the modern technical tips, we need to talk about the first technology. And this is a technology so fundamental that every human on the planet uses this technology every day, and that is fire. In our earliest days, we ate only what we could gather. Very few plants are edible for humans on their own, and living was hard. But fire allowed us to eat foods we could never eat before. It allowed us to live in places we could never live before. It allowed us to fire bricks, which allowed us to build much better buildings and even permanent structures out of clay, and this led to cities and civilization. Not to mention that even today, if you turn on a light bulb or drive a car, you do so because somewhere there's a fire burning in a power plant allowing you to do that. And yet, fire is also one of the most destructive forces on Earth. Whole cities can be destroyed by fire. So fire is a good servant, but an evil master. So what is true with fire is actually true with all technologies. So what is critical is for you to learn how to master technology, how to make technology your servant rather than you being a servant to technology. And to teach you how to make technology your servant, I'm going to tell you another story, and that is a story of my mom. She grew up with technology, but she didn't grow up with computers. She never had a computer class, and computers appeared in her house, but there was no guru to teach her. She learned everything the hard way. And so what do I mean by hard way? I mean that she had an abusive relationship with her computer. She had that feeling of walking on eggshells, fearful of doing or clicking something that might prompt a violent or intimidating error from the computer. She felt like she had no confidence and no psychological energy when it came to the computer. And she was trapped in an abusive relationship with her computer. So if you are feeling that way with your computer, just realize that you're not the only one. Another thing that was a challenge for my mom is growing up with Windows 95, she was trained to never go to help because Windows 95's help was notoriously unhelpful. And so who did she go to for help? Well, the primary people in her life to help her were her children. And children derive a lot of security from knowing that their parents have the answers. And while this does fade as we get older, it never goes away. It is psychologically difficult when the roles are reversed and the child becomes the caretaker for the parent. And while this is difficult for adults who have to care for their ailing parents, it is impossible for children. So the result is that children, when they're asked for help by their mother or by their father, they respond with impatience and even anger. And this is because it is too psychologically difficult for them to be the mentor and for the parent to be the student. And if this was you, you may have assumed that you were stupid with technology because your child was so impatient, and maybe even take on an identity of being a tech idiot, which is toxic self-talk. The reality, though, is that you're not a tech idiot. You just had the wrong mentor. So my first tech tip for getting good with technology is this. Stop asking your children for help with technology. Don't do it ever again. Don't ask your son to build your website, and don't ask your daughter to design your book cover. This is like asking them for money. It's unnatural for water to flow uphill. Your children are the worst possible people to ask for help in the entire world because they're your own children. So what should you do instead? Well, learn how to get good with technology. And learn how to do it like a child. It's not uncommon for children in a family to know more about technology than their parents. There's a reason why parents looking to their children for help is so common. But if you pause and think about it, that doesn't make any sense, right? How is it possible for a child in just a few short years to know more about technology than their educated and literate parents? I don't know a lot about children, but I do have a few of my own. And one thing I've noticed is that children tend to be self-destructive idiots. I love my kids to pieces, but I feel like I save my kids' lives on a regular basis. Just this morning, my two sons came up with a new way of putting their lives in peril. And there is a reason that we don't let children sign contracts or get married. But while children may be ignorant, they are quick learners, and that is what makes the difference. It may be why you've asked a child for technical help. There are two keys to their technical mastery that you can put into practice today. Once you know them, you can use those keys to become a quick learner too. So let's learn about how to become like a child and to enter the kingdom of technology. The first thing is a sense of childlike wonder. Children don't see learning as something to suffer through. They see it as something to be enjoyed. That is, until they're forced into an institutional educational system that beats this love of learning out of them with impersonal standardization and memorization. But even for children who are institutionalized early, they have several years to enjoy wonder-driven learning. So that sense of childlike wonder is incredibly powerful. And if you reawaken that in your heart, you may find that technology gets a lot easier. The other challenge that we have as adults that children don't have is that we take ourselves too seriously. We take our work too seriously. We're in too much of a hurry to take time to learn. And this is like being in too much of a hurry to chop down a tree that we don't want to take time to sharpen the axe. It is foolishness. Time invested on education is rarely wasted. Another way this presents itself is as destination fever. We're so focused on the end goal that everything else seems like an obstacle. So my encouragement to you is to enjoy the journey. The authors who make it in this business are the authors who learn to enjoy writing and enjoy editing and enjoy learning technology, enjoy learning and doing marketing, enjoy publishing, and the rest of it. If all you care about is, quote, being published, unquote, you will burn out before you find the success you seek. For this photo, I handed my 20-month-old daughter a calculator, and I want you to look at the expression of delight on her face over a calculator. And here's the thing, I remember having that same delight over my dad's calculator when I was her age, or perhaps a little bit older. It never went away from me, and calculators still are magical things. Now, in this photo, she doesn't know her numbers, but she is pushing buttons, and she is experiencing childlike wonder. The second reason children are such quick learners is that they are curious, insatiably curious. One of my sons was curious about how things tasted, and he went on a crusade to taste everything he could. He wanted to drink our coffee, and he wanted to eat all of the dust bunnies that were under the couch. In fact, he was more interested in the food under the couch than he was the food on his plate. He already knows what a Cheerio tastes like, but what does a Cheerio covered in dust taste like? There's only one way to find out. When you hand a child a piece of technology, the first thing they do is to fiddle with it. They want to know what the buttons do, so they push them to find out. And this is the best way to learn. The desire to push buttons is also something that dies in some people as they grow old. Some people become timid to push the button unless they already know what it does. And once this happens, once you go through this shift where you won't push the button until you know what it does, you stop learning technology. Because how can you learn what the button does without pushing it? It becomes a complete trap. And what's so tragic about it is that the people who've fallen into this trap are afraid to push the button because they're afraid they're going to break it. And as a result, they live in ignorance, which actually gives them more technical problems over time than they would have had if they just push the button. Fear can become a chain of ignorance that binds you to failure, but it is a chain that you can break. There are two kinds of people in this world. People who rent a car and don't push any button if they don't know what it does on the dashboard, and people who can't leave the parking lot of the rental car company until they push all of the buttons. So become that second kind of person. Next time you rent a car, don't leave the parking lot until you've pushed all the buttons. Pair your phone so you can listen to podcasts and hear directions. It's not only more fun to live as someone who pushes the buttons, it's also the only way to tech savviness. Tech-savvy people treat the manual as an optional safety net, not a how-to book. I'm not saying that you throw away the manual, but I am saying not to rely on it as much. You will learn faster if you fiddle your way to understanding. I don't know a single tech-savvy person who reaches for the manual first, and I bet you don't either. Manuals are a crutch for the tech timid that keeps them from learning technology because that's not how you learn. You don't learn technology by reading a manual any more than you learn to ride a bike by reading a book on riding a bike. The only way to learn is to do. So here is something practical that you can do right now. Open up your phone and find the settings icon and just start fiddling with settings. Push the buttons to find out what they do. Spend at least 10 minutes toggling things on and off. And at the end of this time, not only will you better know how to use your phone, but some of those changes you made, you might actually want to keep. Your phone will be forever more enjoyable for you. Then feel free to leave a comment on this episode with the one feature that you found that most delighted you. I want you to pretend like you're a kid on the Playscape telling another kid on the Playscape this cool thing that you found. But for some of you, the idea of pushing a button is scary. In fact, you're tempted to stop listening to this episode right now because you're feeling fear in your heart. So I want to talk about how you can handle that fear and how you can find the courage to push the button. In fact, I'm going to give you 4 different methods that you can use. You don't need to use all 4, but one of these 4 I think will help you or be the easiest for you to implement right now. The first method is to focus on the power. Focus on how fun it will be to know what the button does. Once you know what the button does, you will have power over your life, power over your world, and feeling that power is a great feeling. The second method is to switch fears. One fear can displace another fear. This is the most common technique for authors who have the fear commonly known as writer's block. So writer's block is just a name for fear. And it's most commonly fought by authors with a tool called a deadline. A deadline, a real one with consequences, magically makes writer's block go away because you're more afraid of missing the deadline than you are afraid of writing. There's a great Calvin and Hobbes that illustrates this. Calvin is playing in the sandbox and Hobbes walks up to him and he says, "Do you have an idea for your story yet?" And Calvin says, "No, I'm waiting for inspiration." You can't just turn on creativity like a faucet. You have to be in the right mood. Hobbes says, "What mood is that?" And Calvin says, "Last minute panic." So for a lot of authors, this is the method that they use, especially if you're just getting started in your career. The longer you write, the more confidence you'll have and the bolder you will be. You see, courage is doing the right thing while feeling afraid. Boldness is not feeling the fear at all, and eventually courage can turn into boldness. There's another method to help you manage your fear and to help you find your courage, and that is love. Would you face a scary guy in a back alley? Probably not, but what if he was threatening your child? A small mother will challenge a big criminal out of love for her child. The better you love your reader, the less fear you will experience. More love means less fear, so much so that it is said that perfect love casts out all fear. Now, I don't know if any of us can love perfectly, but it is something to aspire to. Saying that love is the answer may feel a little squishy, so let me put it a different way. Let me say, know your mission. In World War II, the French coast was heavily defended, and the Allies knew they needed to land on that coast. And on D-Day, the Allies invaded several different places along the French coasts, and most of them were beaches. But between Utah Beach and Omaha Beach was a cliff known as Pointe du Hoc. And in order to take either of those beaches, somebody had to climb up that cliff. So Rutgers Rangers were assigned to do this job, and before them loomed a 10-story cliff that they'd have to climb while being shot at by the German troops above. Now, where did they find the courage to climb that cliff? Well, they knew the importance of their mission. Pointe du Hoc overlooked both beaches that the Americans would be landing on. The German artillery on top of the cliff could fire down on either beach. If this hill was not taken, the whole landing could fail. Their courage came from their mission. They knew why the scary job had to be done. And even more than that, it came from their who. They knew that every person in France they liberated was one less person under the tyrannical control of Adolf Hitler. They also knew that they were not in this alone. Behind them was a free world rooting for their success, not to mention a navy that was making being on top of that cliff quite unpleasant for the Germans. And above them was an air force dropping bomb after bomb. In fact, in the YouTube version of this episode, I have a photograph that was taken of Pointe du Hoc smoking after the Americans bombed it. You are not alone. You have people who are in your corner who are not just rooting for you, but helping you too. And that can also be a source of strength. The fourth method to overcome your fear is to just do it scared. Sometimes if something's worth doing, it's worth doing scared. And it's okay to do something while you're still afraid. Sometimes that's the only way forward. In fact, it's the essence of courage. The anticipation is often worse than the action itself. The bottom of the cliff was where the German grenades were landing. Believe it or not, climbing the cliff was safer than standing around at the bottom. Sometimes action is like hot tea. It's too hot to touch, but not too hot to drink. So just embrace it. Do the hard thing, regardless of how you feel. We've talked about tech mastery from a big picture perspective. Now let's talk about the specifics. And I have one tip to rule them all. This one tip will answer 80% of your technical questions. And that is to type your question into Google or Bing. There are two types of people in this world. Those who know how to Google their questions and those who don't. So often I get emails from authors asking questions and they could have gotten the answer immediately if they had typed that question into Google, just as a question. Pretend that Google is Ask Jeeves from the year 2000 and type in your question as if you were talking to a human being. And it's really quite effective. I also have a private Google search engine that just searches our 400 plus episodes of novel marketing and my 100 plus episodes of the Christian Publishing Show. You can find that search engine at pickthomas'sbrain.com. No apostrophe. So it's powered by Google, but it just searches answers from my podcasts. When you call tech support, most of the time they are just typing your question into Google. I know this because I did this. When I first graduated college, people would call me with technical help, and I would listen to their question, type it into Google, give them the answer. They would say, "Thank you so much." And I'd say, "You're welcome." And then I'd say, "I'm sending you a bill." And then I got tired of that, and I decided to start teaching people how to Google their questions themselves. Type the error code into Google, and you'll get some help. Type the problem into Google, and you'll find somebody else who had that problem and other people who provided the answer. Another way to get better with technology is to invest in community. You will get better at technology if you help others. Teaching is actually one of the best ways to learn. And it's nice to have a place to post your questions where you can get help from other people. It's a give and a take. This is the essence of community, breathing out and breathing in. And if you're looking for a community, I recommend that you check out authormedia.social. This is a free social network that I provide as a gift to my listeners. We have boards there on publishing, on marketing and promotion, on craft, on websites, all kinds of things. There's even a job board if you're looking to hire somebody or if you're looking for work. And you can find that for free at www.authormedia.social. That's www.authormedia.social. The key to getting a lot out of a community is being more committed to answering more questions than asking questions. The more you sow, the more you will reap. Another option is to invest in personal tech support. Hire someone who is not your child to answer your questions. For an author, this is probably best if you hire a savvy indie. But for general questions, there's things like the Geek Squad provided by Best Buy that will support everything from your TV to your phone to your dishwasher and even your dryer. So sometimes paying a little bit for professional help can be a very good investment. My final tip is to persist. There's this dip that Seth Godin talks about where when we're first doing something, more effort leads to more results. And then we hit the dip. This is where more effort actually leads to less results. This is when we're writing our book, often when we get our first really harsh but true criticism. It's when you think the website is almost finished and then you realize that it's still broken in some really fundamental ways. And we hit the dip in pretty much every career. Every part of life has to go through the dip. Even the characters in your book have to go through the crash at the end of the second act. But if you persist past that dip, it does get better if you keep at it. You can do this. Remember, you are made in God's image, and He has given you everything you need to do everything He has called you to do. The ancients had a word for this. They called it grace. Now, we often get grace confused with mercy. Mercy is what God gives us for the things we've done in the past. But grace is the power of God to do the will of God in the present. And God giving us His power is truly unmerited favor. Now, you may not believe in Jesus, and you may be thinking, this is a lot of religious talk, and it's not helpful for me. So let me give you that same argument from a secular perspective. Our attitude influences how we interact with computers. If we expect them to cause us trouble, we will spend less time fiddling with them. And this will cause us to learn less about computers and ultimately to have more trouble. Thus, our attitude can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, changing how we experience technology. Your attitude also has an effect on the people around you. No one likes to be around a grumpy complainer. The more positive your attitude, the more others will want to help you. You'll also like yourself better as you have a better attitude. Now, I'm not saying to paste a smile over how terrible you feel. There's actually an ancient technique that is scientifically proven to make you actually feel better while also improving your attitude. And that technique is called gratitude. It's called thankfulness. Instead of complaining, I hate having to promote my book online. Instead, find something to be thankful about. You could say, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to tell the whole world about my book from the comfort of my own home. Instead of complaining about how you don't know how to use your computer, be thankful that you have a computer. There are a lot of people in this world who can't afford a computer and would love to have the kinds of problems that you have. Here's how you can start feeling better right now. Post a comment in the comment section about something related to technology that you're thankful for. You can post as many gratitudes as you would like, and the more you write, the better you will feel. I guarantee it. This will dramatically shift your perspective. Okay, before we go, I want to give you even more specific advice. So here are some tech stress reduction strategies. And the first is to prepare now for disaster. We live in a broken world, and disaster will strike, and it will strike at the worst possible moment. For example, your hard drive will crash. This is an technical inevitability. So if you've ever seen the inside of a hard drive, there's a disk in a disk drive that spins at up to 7,200 revolutions per minute. And this disk is spinning every single minute your computer is running. So just like a tire, given enough spins, it will fail. And if you have a solid state drive, you're not out of the weeds. Those also inevitably fail, but for different reasons. So if you bought a cheap PC a long time ago, it may fail very soon. But Your new Mac may also fail very soon. You never know. So what should you do? You should set up backups, and specifically you should set up automatic backups. Any backup system where you have to take any action whatsoever is no backup system at all, because the one time you forget to do it will be the time that it fails. Every single tech guru in the world agrees that backups are needed because of how unreliable hard drives are in the long run. This is just a part of doing business. If you're running a Mac, I recommend Time Machine. It's free. The software is free. And there is a version of this for PC that I'm less familiar with called File History. Both of these will back up your computer to a local hard drive that you plug in via USB. The plus side of this is that it's very fast and it's pretty inexpensive. You can get a good USB hard drive for between $100 and $200. After that, your computer is automatically backed up to that external hard drive and you're good to go. Now, it won't protect you from the big three: fires, floods, and felons. If your house catches on fire and your computer burns, so will the hard drive. So the principle of backups is 3-2-1. You want to have 3 copies of your file in at least 2 locations. You have 1 copy on your computer, 1 copy on your hard drive backup, and 1 copy in the cloud. Whatever is affecting your computer likely will not affect the cloud. And this is where your computer backs up to automatically. In that way, even if there's a fire, your files are safe. For me, I use Dropbox for online backups. I like it because it not only backs up my files to the cloud, but it also copies my files from my laptop to my desktop and back and forth. I have a shared Dropbox folder, and any file that I edit in that folder is automatically synced to my other computer. And I can also share specific folders with my podcast editor, for instance, which makes sharing large files very easy. And I like the fact that I can edit a presentation on my desktop and then flip open my laptop, and the most recent version of the presentation is there on my laptop. Dropbox also has a scanning app that allows me to quickly scan documents from my phone to send to my accountant. Now, there are cheaper alternatives out there. I've heard good things about Backblaze, but in my experience, Dropbox is the best. The second tip is to read the whole page. This is unbelievably effective, and I learned the power of this tip back when I was doing tech support right out of college. Sometimes people would call me up while I was in the car, so I couldn't look at what they were seeing, so I would just ask them, read me what's on the page. So they would start reading, and I typically have to say, no, start at the beginning of the page. Start at the top of the page and read me what you see. Tell me what you see. And more often than not, that was all I needed to do to fix the problem. Because once they opened up their eyes and looked at the whole page, suddenly they realized that the answer was right in front of them the whole time. You see, the more panicky people get, the less of the page they can see. Fear creates a kind of tunnel vision where you can only see a few inches around the cursor. And this makes using a computer really difficult. That's why I spent so much time talking about fear at the beginning of this episode, because fear really is the problem. The answer is often right there in front of you. You just have to open your eyes. And the reason why you can't isn't because you're physically blind. It's because you're psychologically blind. So take a deep breath and read the whole page. The number one tech support question in the world is, I can't log in. And the answer to that question is almost always on the page. In fact, 99% of the time it's on the page. There's typically a forgot your password button or a can't log in button right there around the login button. And if you just click that, you can solve your problem yourself. Now, sometimes the answer is behind a help button, right? It's not the 90s anymore, and help is now actually helpful. The big shift between Windows 95 help, which was not helpful, and present-day help, which is the internet. Now, at the end of every help article is a question. Was this article helpful? With a thumbs up and a thumbs down. And if enough people thumbs down, the company who wrote that article will make it better. And there have been thousands of people ahead of you improving those help pages so that now they're quite good. The third way to reduce your tech stress is to use a password manager. So here's how a hacker would hack your computer. He would look up your password. from one of the big data breaches. Perhaps it's LinkedIn or Facebook or Adobe. They've all been hacked. And the hackers who hack these big corporations will post all of the passwords for all of the users publicly on the web. So they would just look up your email address, find your password, and then start logging into your accounts with that password that you used more than once. Because most people only have a handful of passwords, or they have one password with a few variations of that one password. And they tend to reuse that password over and over again. So once someone has your password in your email, suddenly they can start resetting your social media. They can get into your bank. They can email all of your friends ads through Facebook Messenger and worse. And if this hasn't happened to you yet, it's likely only a matter of time. So what do? How can you protect yourself when these other companies are getting hacked? There's actually a really straightforward method, and that is to use a different password for every website. Do the same thing with your digital keys that you already do in the real world for your real life keys, right? You have a different key for your house than you have for your car. And you want to use a different password for every single website. I was once notified by my bank that they had been hacked and they asked me to reset my password. And fortunately for me, I had never reused that password. That was a unique password to that bank. And so once I reset my password to something else, new and long and uncrackable, the hackers had a key that opened no locks. And so I was immediately safe again. Now, it's impossible to remember thousands of passwords, and especially those password and username combinations, right? Is the username your email address? If so, which one? Is it some other kind of username? Was that username taken? Is it your backup username? This is impossible to remember and a major source of stress. But there's a solution, and that is to store your passwords in an encrypted vault. That is much more secure than keeping them in your head and more secure than having a piece of paper by your desk. And this is true security. It may not feel secure to have them all in a single place, but it's actually much safer to do it this way. The encrypted vault that I recommend is 1Password. It is excellent. You can get it on both your Mac and your PC and your phone. You can have unique passwords everywhere and it will remember them. And you just have one super duper password to unlock 1Password, and it stores all your other passwords right there. My final tip is to not repeat the same action more than twice. Doing the same thing over and over again doesn't work and can lead to some silly tech superstitions. So what do you do if you try to do something and you do it again and it doesn't work the second time? You Google it, right? We'd already talked about this. You just type your problem into Google. Almost always you'll find the answer. So let's take a trip back to the 18th century where most people only had one pair of clothes. Clothes in those days were incredibly expensive because all of the clothing was made by hand. Then Sir Richard Arkwright invented the cotton spinning machine in 1775. His technology made workers dramatically more productive, allowing one worker to do what would have taken many workers to complete. You can think of this as the ChatGPT of the 18th century. Workers opposed this new technology because they felt it threatened their livelihoods. In fact, they even destroyed one of Arkwright's mills in an anti-technology riot in 1779. Those protesting workers were led by a man called Ned Ludd, and they came to be known as Luddites. And the term Luddite is still in use today. Here's the interesting thing. The British Parliament conducted an investigation to see the impact that Arkwright's invention had on the British economy. Before his invention, there were approximately 7,900 people producing cotton textiles in the United Kingdom. So here's my question for you. How many British workers do you think worked in the textile industry 2 decades after his labor-saving invention? The answer is 320,000 people, a massive increase in the number of workers. In fact, this is often the case. The spreadsheet, which everyone thought was going to put accountants out of work in the 1980s, ended up in creating more accounting jobs, just like this textile machine. The reality is that for every one textile worker before, now there was 30. So why the jump? Because new technology allowed England to make textiles cheaper and faster. People started doing something they could never do before, and that was buying a second shirt and a third pair of pants. Not only that, but ships from all over the world came to buy England's inexpensive, high-quality fabric. England's economy boomed as a result of this new technology that helped trigger the Industrial Revolution. And as a result of England getting over their fear of new technology, we live in a world where most of us can afford a closet full of clothes. So the moral of the story and my encouragement for you is to master technology and use it for good. Or, put another way, master technology so you can use it for good. Now get out there and be a force for good with your newfound technological power. Our featured patron today is Joy Cleveland, author of To Call My Own. Hoping for a fresh start, Dr. Karis Henry accepts a position in Harbor, Missouri, a small underserved town by Feather Lake. The long hours and demands of the community clinic are just what she needs, a way to bury the memories and control the pain. But the minute Clay Montes shows up, her new life falls to pieces. This book is for fans of heartwarming romance, and To Call My Own is a must-read story of love, healing, and second chances. Joy Cleveland, thank you so much for being a patron of the Novel Marketing Podcast. I really appreciate your support keeping these episodes on the air. The Novel Marketing Podcast is a production of authormedia.com. Audio engineering is by William Umstattd. Blogification is by Shauna Lettler, and you can find the blog version of this episode along with links to everything we talked about today at authormedia.com/417. I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr. saying thank you for listening and live long and prosper.